Hey everyone, welcome to this deep dive
Yeah.
into China, where we're going to be looking at some excerpts from Wikipedia articles on China and Chinese culture.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah, so, um, I think everyone kind of has a vague idea about China in their heads, but we really wanted to go deeper than that, beyond just the headlines.
Right.
And
Yeah.
really unpack, what makes this nation tick.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the most fascinating things is just how much history plays a role, you know?
Oh, totally.
And even just looking at the name China itself, I mean, it kind of gives us a clue about this whole journey we're about to go on.
You mean because it's connected to the Qin dynasty?
Exactly.
All right.
The dynasty that unified China way back in 221 BCE.
That's a pretty long legacy.
It really is.
Yeah.
And it's not just a coincidence either. I mean, if you think about the name of the dominant ethnic group in China,
The Han Chinese.
right, the Han Chinese, that also goes back to a specific dynasty that, the Han dynasty.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Which came right after the...
So it's like these names aren't just labels.
Right.
There's like these threads that connect us through time,
Absolutely. They shape our understanding of an entire culture.
Yeah. And speaking of time, China's history is like this epic saga, right? I mean, it's dynasty after dynasty, each one leaving its own mark.
It's true. And to really grasp China today, I think you have to understand that history.
Okay, so where do we even begin with all that history?
Well, we could start with the Han dynasty.
Okay.
I mean, it wasn't the first dynasty, but it was the one that really solidified a distinct cultural identity.
Well,
One that still resonates in China today.
wow.
This was also when the Silk Road started to really flourish, linking China to the West.
Yeah, I remember learning about that in school.
Yeah, and it had a huge impact on both sides,
Yeah, like a cultural exchange route.
Exactly. It was about more than just trade. It was about the flow of ideas and beliefs.
Okay, so the Han dynasty sets the stage, then what?
Well, and you have the Tang dynasty.
Oh, the Tang dynasty.
This period is often called a golden age,
Yeah, I've heard that too.
and for good reason.
Okay, why?
Well, for one thing, it was incredibly cosmopolitan.
Okay.
You had all these different cultures and influences coming together and mixing.
Wow.
Art, literature, trade, everything was flourishing.
So it was like a period of intense creativity.
Exactly. And what's really fascinating is how the Tang dynasty managed to embrace all these different cultures without losing its own unique identity.
Okay, so they weren't just absorbing these influences, they were transforming them.
Right. They were weaving them into something distinctly Chinese.
Wow, that's pretty amazing.
It really is. And it challenges that idea that China has always been closed off to the outside world.
Right, totally.
But the Tang dynasty wasn't the only one that was incredibly innovative.
Okay, so what came next?
Well, the Song dynasty, for example, made some incredible leaps in technology and commerce.
Okay, how so?
I mean, at its peak, the Song dynasty had the largest economy in the world.
Seriously?
Can you imagine that?
Wow, centuries ago.
China was already a global economic powerhouse,
That's wild.
driven by innovation and trade.
It's amazing how much we tend to forget about these earlier periods of Chinese history.
It is.
Okay, so we've got the Han dynasty, the
Right.
Tang dynasty, the Song
Right.
dynasty.
Right.
Now what?
Well, then things shifted quite a bit with the Yuan dynasty.
Okay, how so?
Well, this is when the Mongols came to power,
The Mongols.
under Kublai Khan.
I've heard of them?
The Yuan dynasty ushered in this period of Mongol rule over China.
Okay, and how did that change things?
Well, it was a time of both disruption and integration.
Okay, I see.
While Mongol influence was definitely felt, they also adopted and adapted to many aspects of Chinese culture.
So it was like a two-way street.
Right. And they also expanded trade routes even further, connecting China to even more distant parts of the world.
So that theme of connection keeps popping up.
Yeah, exactly. It's a recurring pattern in Chinese history.
Okay, so what about the Ming dynasty?
Oh, the Ming dynasty.
I always associate that with those epic voyages of Zheng. I mean, those expeditions were massive. They reached all the way to Africa.
It's incredible, isn't it?
Yeah, but there's also this debate, right?
Right.
About whether those voyages represent China's openness to the world, or if they were just this brief anomaly before they kind of turned inward again.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, and it's a debate worth having.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, Shanghai's voyages were remarkable for their scale and reach, but just a few decades later, the Ming dynasty started restricting maritime trade and focusing more internally.
So what caused that shift?
Well, that's the big question, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Was it a deliberate policy choice driven by internal pressures?
Or maybe a bit of both.
It's hard to say for sure, but it really highlights this tension that exists in China's history.
Okay, this tension between what?
between their outward-looking ambitions and their focus on internal stability.
I wonder if those two things are even really in opposition.
That's a good question.
Maybe they're two sides of the same coin.
It's possible.
Sure.
But before we go too far down that road, we do have one more dynasty to cover.
Oh, right, the Qing dynasty.
The last imperial dynasty before everything changed.
Exactly. So tell me about that.
Well, the Qing dynasty marked the end of an era. They ruled for nearly 3 centuries, expanding China's territory to its greatest extent.
Wow.
But it was also a period of increasing internal challenges and external pressures.
Okay.
And those pressures ultimately led to the dynasty's collapse in 1912.
And that collapse set the stage for the tumultuous 20th century.
It did.
The transition from empire to republic, and then to the rise of the Communist Party.
Right.
And the People's Republic we know today.
It's a lot to unpack.
Yeah, for sure. But it seems like understanding these shifts is crucial if we really want to make sense of modern China.
I completely agree. The fall of the Qing dynasty wasn't just a change in leadership. It was a fundamental transformation of China's political and social structures.
Okay.
The Republic of China was established, but it faced a lot of challenges.
Like what?
Well, internal divisions for one thing, and constant threats from outside forces.
It sounds like a really unstable time.
It was, and then of course you have the rise of the Communist Party, led by figures like Mao Zedong.
Yeah, Mao Zedong, he's one of those figures who just looms large in history, right?
It does.
His leadership during the revolution and the early years of the People's Republic had a huge impact not just on China, but on global politics as well.
Absolutely. He's definitely a pivotal figure, but to really understand his influence, I think you have to look at the context he was operating in.
Yeah, what do you mean?
Well, China was emerging from decades of turmoil and instability. It was a nation struggling to find its place in a rapidly changing world. And Mao, with his blend of Marxist ideology and, Chinese nationalism, he offered a vision that really resonated with a lot of people at the time.
Yeah, that makes sense.
His leadership was really instrumental in unifying the country and propelling it onto the world stage. You can't deny that.
But Mao's era wasn't without its problems, was it?
No, not at all.
I mean, the Great Leap Forward and the Cultural Revolution, those were periods of intense upheaval, right?
Absolutely. Those are really important periods to consider. I mean, the Great Leap Forward, with its goals for rapid industrialization and agricultural collectivization, it ended up having some pretty devastating consequences.
Yeah, it led to widespread famine, right?
It did, and economic hardship on a massive scale.
It's hard to even imagine the level of suffering that happened during that time.
It's a really dark chapter in Chinese history.
And then the Cultural Revolution, with its focus on ideological purity and purging anyone seen as an enemy of the revolution, it further divided Chinese society.
The Cultural Revolution was a really traumatic period. A lot of intellectuals, artists, ordinary citizens, they were persecuted, imprisoned, even killed.
It's incredible how these events still shape China's political and social landscape today.
It really is, but then you have this really interesting shift in the late 1970s under Deng Xiaoping.
Right, a move away from those Maoist policies.
Exactly, and a move toward economic reforms that really seemed to kickstart China's rise as a global power.
And those reforms were pretty dramatic, weren't they?
Deng Xiaoping recognized that China needed to modernize its economy and open up to the world. I mean, his famous phrase, "to get rich is glorious," that signaled a huge departure from the Mao era.
Yeah, it was a whole new way of thinking about things.
Exactly, and those reforms really laid the groundwork for what we see today. I mean, China's transformation since 1978 has been astounding.
It really have.
They've gone from this isolated, largely agrarian nation to a global economic powerhouse.
Yeah, the world's second largest economy.
And it happened in just a few decades.
And you can't talk about China's economic rise without mentioning the Belt and Road Initiative.
Oh, the BRI.
Right, this massive infrastructure project connecting Asia, Africa, and Europe.
It's really reshaping global trade and sparking a lot of debate.
Yeah, it seems like the BRI kind of highlights the complex and sometimes controversial nature of China's rise as a global power.
It does. It raises a lot of questions about China's intentions and its impact on the world.
Okay, but let's shift gears for a second and talk about something that often gets overlooked in these conversations about economics and geopolitics.
What's that?
China's advancements in science and technology.
Yes. It's definitely a point worth emphasizing. China has been making huge strides in these areas, catching up to, and in some cases, surpassing Western nations.
Yeah, I'm constantly reading about new Chinese tech companies making waves globally.
It's really impressive. massive. I mean, they're making breakthroughs in fields like artificial intelligence, quantum computing, biotechnology.
And their infrastructure is incredible. The scale of their high-speed rail network, their bridges, their skyscrapers.
It's mind-boggling, isn't it?
It really is. It speaks to their engineering prowess and their ambition to be the forefront of innovation.
They're not just copying Western models anymore. They're developing their own innovative solutions, pushing the boundaries of what's possible.
Yeah, and it's not just happening at the government level either.
Right, there's this vibrant entrepreneurial spirit in China with all these startups and tech companies trying to be the next big thing.
It's like this dynamism is woven into the fabric of Chinese society.
It really is, but let's not forget about the cultural side of things.
Oh, totally. When you talk about China, you can't just focus on economics and technology. You have to delve into their rich and diverse culture.
Absolutely. Chinese culture is this tapestry woven over thousands of years, full of tradition, innovation, and adaptation.
It's a culture that's both influenced and been influenced by the world around it.
Precisely.
I'm always amazed by Chinese architecture, not just the grandeur of the Forbidden City or the Great Wall, but the intricate details, the symbolism, the way they blend form and function so gracefully.
It's like stepping back in time.
Yeah, and you can see this interplay of past and present in so many aspects of Chinese culture.
Like what?
Like the revival of traditional clothing, like Hanfu.
Ah, yes.
Or the fusion of ancient instruments with modern beats in their music.
It's a fascinating mix.
It's like they're constantly having this dialogue between tradition and modernity, trying to figure out what it means to be Chinese in the 21st century.
That's a really insightful way to put it.
And what about Chinese cuisine?
Oh, it's an absolute feast for the senses.
It really is the variety, flavors, textures, cooking techniques. It's incredible.
Each region has its own unique culinary traditions.
I think everyone has their favorite Chinese dishes, but it's amazing how much there is to explore.
Absolutely.
And let's not forget about China's sporting culture. You know, they have ancient traditions like martial arts.
Right.
And then this modern passion for things like basketball and esports.
It's a fascinating blend of old and new.
Yeah, it reflects this dynamism we've been talking about.
You have these ancient practices like Tai Chi and Kung Fu that are still popular today.
Right.
And then you have millions of fans going crazy for basketball.
It's like sports offer this window into the evolving values and aspirations of Chinese society.
It's a good point.
And all of this is happening in a country with over 1.4 billion people.
The largest population in the world.
That scale is hard to even comprehend.
It's massive.
Yeah.
It presents both incredible challenges and enormous opportunities.
Yeah, I mean, you have these mega cities with populations larger than many countries, and then you have rural villages where life hasn't changed that much for centuries.
It's a land of contrast.
And within that vast population, there's also a lot of diversity, right?
Absolutely. A lot of people think of the Han Chinese as the dominant group, but there are actually 55 officially recognized ethnic minority groups within China.
Wow. I didn't realize there were that many.
They each have their own unique culture, language, and traditions, and they contribute so much to Chinese society.
That's really interesting.
It's like this mosaic of cultures all coming together.
And that diversity extends to religion, too, right?
It does. While the Chinese Communist Party officially promotes atheism, religious belief and practice are actually experiencing a revival in China.
So it's not as simple as saying China's a secular nation.
No, it's much more complex than that. Buddhism, Taoism, Confucianism, folk religions, they all coexist, often blending together.
Wow, it sounds like China is this incredible mix of ancient and modern dynamism and tradition, challenges, and opportunities.
It is. China defies easy categorization.
That's for sure.
Yeah, it really is a lot to take. In China is such a multifaceted place.
It is, and it's been an amazing journey exploring its history, its economic rise, its culture.
I agree.
But now that we've reached the end of our deep dive,
right,
what's the main takeaway for our listener? What should they be thinking about after they finish listening to this?
That's a great question. I think the most important thing to remember is that China is not a monolith, you know?
Okay.
It's a nation with incredible diversity, dynamism, complexity.
Yeah, I can definitely see that now.
It's a place where ancient traditions exist alongside cutting-edge technologies, where economic power is intertwined with cultural influence, and where the past is constantly shaping the present.
It's like this constant push and pull between tradition and modernity.
Exactly, and I think to truly understand China, you have to embrace that complexity. You know?
Yeah, you can't just rely on those simplistic narratives.
Right, you have to look deeper.
But as China's global influence continues to grow, it raises some big questions for the rest of the world.
Oh, for sure, like what?
Well, as China becomes more integrated into the global system, How will it navigate the challenges and responsibilities that come with being a major power? How will it balance its own interests with the need for global cooperation and stability?
Those are tough questions.
They are, and there are no easy answers.
And those questions are further complicated by the fact that China's political system, with its one-party state and its emphasis on social control, it's often viewed with suspicion or even hostility in the West.
Yeah, that's true. There are some fundamental differences in values and ideologies that can lead to friction and misunderstanding.
Absolutely. But I also think it's important to remember that China is not static, It's constantly changing and evolving both internally and in its relationship with the rest of the world.
So it's not just this fixed entity we can define easily.
Exactly. It's a dynamic process.
And we have to engage with that process if we want to understand China.
Right. We need to be willing to look beyond our own preconceived notions and really grapple with its complexities.
Acknowledge its achievements and its challenges.
Exactly. And that requires ongoing dialogue, critical thinking, and an openness to different perspectives.
Well said. So on that note, we'd like to leave you with a final thought to ponder.
Okay, I like it.
Imagine you had the chance to experience just one aspect of Chinese culture firsthand. What would you choose and why? Would it be exploring those ancient temples high up in the Himalayas, sampling all the amazing street food in Beijing, or maybe having a deep conversation about the future of China with some students in Shanghai?
It's a tough choice. There are so many possibilities.
There are. But I think the key is to approach that experience with curiosity, empathy, and an open mind.
Absolutely, because understanding China, truly understanding it, it's not just about knowledge, it's about stepping outside your comfort zone and engaging with the world in all its complexity.
I understood it better myself. So to our listener, we encourage you to keep exploring, delve deeper into China's history, its culture, its impact on the world. Because in our increasingly interconnected world, understanding China isn't just an option, it's a necessity. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.